Today I'm somewhat pissed off. Pissed off, why? Pissed off because recording engineers in this day and age, it's 2025 now, still can't manage to make what I consider a convincing live recording. That's despite me not having issues with that issue. So what's actually brought this on? I guess a couple of weeks ago I did a video on trying to fix up the turd that is Metallica's Death Magnet, and that actually got quite interesting viewership, I guess. Quite a lot of people viewed it because most of my videos don't get a lot of views, but that one got quite a substantial more than what I typically get. So it was curious to me why that was, and then post doing that video I started to get a whole bunch of Metallica live videos appearing in my YouTube feed. So completely unbeknownst to me, Metallica were on their world tour traveling around and just happened to be in Australia at that time when I actually posted that video. That was purely coincidental. It wasn't planned on my part. I had no idea they were here. Just shows you how out of touch I am of these sort of things. So as you do, you get these videos in your feed. So I was just curious. I just happened to listen to a few of those recordings and videos of their live performances in various Australian cities, and lo and behold, although the visuals are stunning, the visual production is amazing, it all looks very professional and whatever, the sound quality has the same limitations that I've always heard in whoever's band live recording of a concert I've heard. They all suffer the exact same problem. They all, from my perspective, are completely unconvincing as far as giving the impression that I, listening to that in my living room or listening to it on headphones, am actually in the audience watching the live performance. They're completely sterile. They've got no real atmosphere. They tend to have a sort of a muddiness to them. And quite commonly, they're also dynamically crushed. So they take all the transient material out of it. So it generally, the genuine reaction I get from them, apart from listening to it on, say, a tablet device through tablet speakers, probably sounds okay on that. But listening to it through a real hi-fi or high-quality headphones, it just leaves me totally unimpressed with the sound quality, because it doesn't convince me at all that I'm actually sitting in the audience watching that performance. And as I alluded to before, the treatment of dynamics and transient material, how it loses its definition, doesn't impress me either. And it doesn't have to be that way, which I've demonstrated adequately in all the multitude of mixes of live recordings I've done for my friend in the Czech Republic, Petr Pavlis, of his favourite band TSA. Or TSR is probably how they pronounce it there. So yeah, it just peeves me that I don't know, a band and a juggernaut of the Metallica juggernaut with all its financial backing, whatever, how much riches it has, whatever, still can't produce a live recording that actually sounds like I'm there and is actually worth my while listening to, because basically if I listen to those, I just get depressed at how poor the sonics are. I love the video quality, the production, the video production's excellent, the actual band performances are excellent. Like, I've got nothing against Metallica. I'm sure the live show was absolutely extraordinary. So before you jump in and start pummeling me over criticizing Metallica and saying how bad their soundtrack for their videos are, I'm not criticizing the band or the band performances at all. I'm just criticizing the engineering in the actual production of the not even criticizing the production of the live sound within the venue itself. I'm sure that sounded brilliant. Got no problem about that. And I can explain why that would sound brilliant and why the recording that they posted doesn't sound brilliant. I'll explain that a little bit later. But so my criticism is entirely on the quality of the audio. Now, if you want to understand what exactly I'm actually talking about, the best way to do exactly that is how I usually do things like this. I basically deconstruct what they've actually produced and put online in YouTube. Do my best at fixing it up and recreating a sound that's more representative of what you might have experienced if you happened to be fortunate enough to attend one of these concerts. The track in question that I will be addressing, I can actually show you here right now, came from YouTube, of course. It's basically this one, Unforgiven. Sort of a track in the sort of style of music that I like listening to. I'm not really into their more thrashy type tracks, but this one, which you could probably almost call a rock ballad, I guess, is really something I quite relate to, so I naturally chose that. It was recorded here, as it says, in the Optus Stadium in Perth, Australia, so that's Stadium Rock. It's a very large venue, so you would expect to hear a substantial amount of atmosphere from that. And if you want to hear a comparison of what they actually put together and what I reconstructed, I can actually show that to you now. I'll just get that out of the way. I don't need that anymore. So here's my session. I've set up a little loop here. I'm not going to explain any of this at the moment, but basically, in a very rough sense, this track here is the original audio. That's the original video. Well, it's not the original. It's actually captured. I captured it using ShareX, basically. It's a quick and dirty way of capturing it. ShareX on a Windows machine. These extra sources here and all this stuff is what I've done to recreate some atmosphere for the recording. And another thing I'd say with regard to the recording, it's clearly obviously been predetermined that they were going to record this high quality. So undoubtedly, what you hear in this soundtrack from the original is mixed from a large number of individual tracks. My best guess is the number of tracks involved is probably anywhere between about 17 and 24 tracks of sound. with mainly probably half of those just coming off the drum kit, and then the rest coming off what you got, the bass guitar, lead guitar, or you actually got two guitars because two guitarists. Oh, there's actually a third guitar because there was an acoustic guitar on a stand, two vocal tracks. So what, there's about 7 tracks dedicated to other instruments and the rest dedicated to the drum kit. Even though they had all that stuff and they recorded it, it just doesn't come across very well to me at all. And it's perfectly what I've come to expect from live recordings from contemporary processes, recording processes. They all sound pretty much the same in terms of their lack of definition and their lack of atmosphere. So, getting to the point, if you want to hear a comparison, don some headphones. It's probably best on the headphones, but you can listen to it on, obviously, good quality loudspeakers or something like that, but I wouldn't bother even trying listening to it on a phone device with its internal speakers, or a tablet with internal speakers, because you're just not going to hear the difference. It's it's not revealing enough. So don your headphones and we'll have a listen. And I'll start with the original.
Give yourselves birth. Do it. Do it now. Thank you. What's up, buddy?
So, hopefully from that, you can hear a substantial difference. Like mine has an atmosphere to it that is, I wouldn't say exactly the same as Stadium Rock, because I actually made it substantially smaller, probably about half the size of what the actual Stadium is. And the reason for that is obviously stadiums aren't acoustically great because of their size, so I wanted to keep it, I wanted to keep the quality of the actual audio relatively high, but give a sense of atmosphere that's comparable to what you might have experienced in the audience. And I think you can say with all honesty, there's pretty much no comparison between the original and what I did. That said, even what I've done to it isn't perfect. It's got issues with it. I don't particularly like the sound of the drum kit. The bass drum, I think that sounds pretty reasonable. I think the toms sound pretty reasonable, and the cymbals sound pretty reasonable, but the snare sound really doesn't do it for me. It's very, I don't know, slappy sort of sound. But that's obviously all to do with whatever processing they've done and how they've processed it. Given if I had full access to however many tracks they had, 20 whatever, it's probably 20 plus tracks. If I had full access to that and did a mix using the approaches that I'd used, I would get a result that was substantially better than my retreatment of their original work. It would have a lot more definition, and I'm sure I could get a much better drum sound out of it. Not only that, I think the vocal lacks definition as well. I would get a much better vocal out of it as well. So all in all, yeah, it just peeves me off to hear time and time again recordings done like this of live performances where they're deliberately trying to get a high quality recording. It just sounds like shit to me, really. And it sounds like, well, I guess now it's time to explain why it sounds like shit. And fundamentally it sounds like shit is because they're essentially doing studio recording process, contemporary studio recording process on a live setting. And let's see, I'll get my whiteboard and I'll be easier to explain with some pictures. So just got to figure out how to hold this thing. So let's imagine, actually, which way am I going? Oh, it doesn't really matter. I can hold it this way. This is your right venue, whatever. They're in the stadium. You've got the stage up here. They got these massive monitors here, either side, projecting the sound. You're here listening to the performance. So what happens? The sound goes through the conventional mixing desk, conventional stereo mixing desk. It's panned and positioned in the appropriate ways. They probably don't use anything much in terms of reverb processing, other than like echo effects or something like that to add a specific type of effect. Just they wouldn't be using I very much doubt that they would be using substantial reverb processing, because the actual environment itself is what's providing the reverb. So, for instance, me sitting in this audience, I'm here, I'm listening to the performance. I hear sound coming from here, but not only do I hear this sound coming from here, there's some boundary over here, I hear a reflection coming from here, I hear a reflection coming from here, probably a reflection coming from here, all over the place. So you hear all these different reflections superimposed with the original source. When they take this mix and record it and then redo it and whatever and put it back, all you're hearing is that. Or actually, you're not even hearing that because basically you've got a 2-channel system, and say you've got the guitarist here panned here and say the vocalist panned here. So you're hearing an image of that coming from there and an image of that coming from here, there, projected in stereo using conventional panning, but you're not hearing any of the atmosphere because none of that is, any of that gets recorded largely gets recorded as leakage into the microphone. So it's all going to whatever the microphone picks up in terms of the atmosphere of the recording is going to be coming from exactly the same direction. So it doesn't, because of that, it just makes the source sound sonically compromised, but it doesn't give the impression of space. Because to get the impression of space, you need that reverberant content to be coming from other directions. Because if it doesn't come from other directions, if it's all coming from the one direction, your brain just interprets it as all being the one source. So it hears it as the one source, and it just hears it as a sonically compromised source because it's got combing from the delayed reflections of the sound. So therein lies the problem. That's fundamentally the problem. I suppose it's a little bit more complicated than that because basically what they do, as far as I'm aware, what they do to give a semblance of the audience, they probably have, say, I don't know, a microphone here and a microphone here to pick up the audience sound. And then they just chuck that on the stereo mix. So that's their atmosphere. The 2 microphones is their atmosphere. And it's a very trivial approximation to what the reality is. And because it's so trivial, your brain hears it as such. So it just hears it as a poor facsimile of reality. It doesn't sound very real. And not only that, because these microphones pick up a whole lot of, they pick up the full spectrum. Now, if you pass all that signal unaltered, because this is basically a trick I learned when I did my own mixes, if you pass that content unaltered into your mix, it just makes everything sound really muddy. So typically, I don't know, in a lot of these live recordings, they won't actually put the atmospheric track particularly loud because the louder you put it, the muddier it sounds. But the key to that is most of the mud comes from the low end. So if you actually low pass, say around, steep low pass around, I don't know, say 300 to 500 hertz, you can largely get rid of that issue. But even so, just using 2 microphones like that in a stereo panning context just doesn't sound very realistic because it's such a, I don't know, trivial type of approximation of the reality that your brain can pick it out as just fake. It's not very real. So to actually make a real sounding recording, like a recording that sounds like it has real acoustics, involved that actually sounds like you're actually there. You need to build a complex picture, a very complex picture. And when it comes to, I don't know, trad recording engineers or whatever, and everything like the whole trad community, they're all about gear. They're all about hardware. You've got to do it on hardware. You've got to have a hardware mixing desk and things like that. You've got to have your SSL desk to do it to get a high quality result. Well, that's, from my perspective, complete and utter BS, right? And in terms of my processing, it is complete BS, because there's no way you can realistically reproduce what I do on a traditional mixing desk. So how can I say that? How can I possibly say that? Well, fundamentally, my processing is based on, well, apart from talking about the equalization and dynamics issues, which I'm not even going to touch, because let's just assume that they can handle those as well as I can. I don't care about that issue. I'm just talking about the spatial aspects of recording. I'm trying to mimic real spaces, basically. So if that's all we're talking about, you're talking about a traditional mixing desk. For a start, pretty much all traditional mixing desks, as far as I'm aware, almost exclusively deal with stereo reproduction. They don't deal with surround sound. They don't have surround panners on them. They've just got conventional panning. So when they're actually doing like a surround sound mix on a traditional mixing desk, it usually involves using multiple buses and stereo-like panning, but over a subset of the number of channels in the format, whether it's 7.1 or whatever. So they don't have a proper three-dimensional panning device, as opposed to DAWs, which do. But the type of panning device that a typical DAW has is trivial. It's basically just selecting between speakers. It doesn't actually add any early reflections to it. It's just doing that. It's got no concept of space. It's just got a concept of direction. Now, spatial panning that I use is completely different in that sense, because it gives you direction and it gives you a sense of space. Because my spatial panner builds an artificial space. So it has a rear wall, it has a side wall, it has a side wall. It also has a ceiling if you want it, but I didn't actually use the ceiling in this case for this particular example, for obvious reasons, because it's a stadium, Optus Stadium in Perth, which doesn't have a ceiling. So there's no ceiling reflection. So I didn't use that. But, so if we just take the case of 3 walls. Well, why, you could potentially ask, why don't I have a 4th wall? Well, the point is, in terms of environmental acoustics, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give an idealized, if you like, close to perfect environmental acoustic. And what you don't want in an environmental acoustic is recycling reflections, specular reflections. Now, what's a specular reflection? Specular reflection is like what you see in a mirror when you're looking at something optical. So it comes back as a single reflection directly at you. It doesn't get scattered. The different kind of reflection that you're more likely to want to have is a diffuse reflection. So a diffuse reflection basically means instead of it coming straight back at you, some of it will come back, some will go that way, some will go that way, some will go that way, some will go that way. And the reason why you want that is because if you've just got specular reflections in a room, you just end up with this echo, which sounds like a flutter. So you hear things over and over again, repeated a cyclic matter. And that is very distracting, and it also destroys intelligibility. So key to environmental acoustics, good environmental acoustics, they always talk about early reflections. It's important to have a lot of early reflections. What's an early reflection? Early reflection is a reflection that arrives within what they call the Haas zone. And the Haas zone, named after Haas, I'm not sure what his qualifications were, whether he's a physicist, a mathematician, or an engineer. I don't know. I haven't looked into his history. But he discovered that basically if a sound arrives within the Haas zone, the brain interprets it as a single source. It doesn't interpret it as an echo. You don't hear it as an echo, you hear it as a single source, like a reinforced single source. So that's the importance of early reflections. So in environmental acoustics, you want to have lots and lots of early reflections coming from lots of different directions. But late reflections, ones that arrive after the Haas zone, you don't want. What you want after the Haas zone is diffuse reflections. So reflections that the hundreds of them coming from all directions, so it's got no sense of directionality. So it sounds like it's coming from everywhere. So that's the two parts of a critical environmental acoustics. You've got the early reflections, and then you've got the late reflections, which should principally be composed of just a reverberant tail that's entirely diffuse. So in my processing, that's exactly what I do. I use my spatial panner to create early reflections, discrete early reflections that actually sound, they have directionalities, they sound like they come from a particular direction. And the reason why that's important within the Haas zone, is because that directionality, hearing that directionality, your brain can interpret the size of a space. It can relay to you how big it thinks the size of a particular room is, based on those. Whereas if it was completely diffuse, it finds it hard to actually make any sense of what the space size is. And you can think of it in terms of this. Basically, the delay between the first arrival and the reflection coming actually defines how big the space is, because there's going to be a time difference arrival. So, for instance, if I'm here, you got the sound coming here, and then you got a reflection coming here. This distance is considerably longer than this distance. And I'd say if I projected it on there, it's probably, I don't know, that distance from there to there is about that to there to there. So the distance this is traveling is twice as far as that. So it's that time difference between the arrival of this sound and the arrival of this sound that defines, for your brain interpreting that sound, how big a space is. So it needs to be able to correlate that difference. So it's much easier for it to correlate that difference if it's just a specular reflection, because then you only get, like in a timeline, you'd only get basically, say, here's your original, here's your first arrival, and here's a reflection, and here's another reflection. So this time difference here defines that physical space size. Whereas if it was a diffuse reflection, you'd have something that looks like this. So you can see, because there's no discrete reflections appearing in there, with a diffuse reflection, with the absence of any specular reflections in the early reflection time zone, it doesn't define any space in terms of a physical size. It defines space, it gives a sense of space in terms of sound coming from all around you, but your brain doesn't really know how to, let's say, attach a size to that space. So getting back to my panner. So, well, the combination of my panner and my spatial panner, my synthetic space reverb. My synthetic space reverb is what I use to get the diffusion, the late reflections, the diffuse tail, the diffuse reverberation tail, which has little or no specular reflection content in it at all. So it's completely directionless. It's coming from all directions, and it decays uniformly. It's very well controlled. It's probably it's like highly idealized. If you wanted to try and recreate that in a real space, it would be very difficult to do. So it's probably better than reality in that sense. It's realizing something that's unrealizable in real space, basically. But so it's just taking the idealized constructs from acoustics engineering of what makes a good acoustic space and trying to realize something that's idealized and actually does that. It's not trying to actually emulate reality, because reality would be more flawed than that. So anyway, the synthetic space is what provides the reverberant tail, and the spatial panning provides the early reflections. So how does that work in the context of my spatial panning plugin? You basically have a listener, which you can position anywhere. Then you have sources. So I might say I put a guitar here or something like this. So then you get a direct path sound coming to you. It models 5, excluding the ceiling reflection, it actually models, if you include the ceiling reflection, it models 6 different directions. So without the ceiling, it models 5. So one of them's a direct reflection off the back wall. One of them's a direct reflection of that wall. One of them's a reflection of that wall. One of them's a reflection that uses 2 walls, so it'd be something like this and something like this. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, what have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reflections plus the direct path. And each of those are unique and dependent on context, on where the actual performer is. So if I move that to here, then all those directions change. They all change. Not only do the directions change, the delays change. The delays between the direct path arrival and the individual sources. But it's more complicated than that as well, because even this, because it's only 5 reflections, it's not that convincing on its own. So as an approximation to make it even more convincing, I basically take, so again, if I look at the timeline, I may have my direct path here, I may have a arrival here of, say, one of my reflections. So what I do is I take this reflection and I turn it into 7 others, and keep the say average delay about the same. Create 7 discrete early reflections in which the power of those 7 add up to the power of a single one. So that is basically replacing that with say 1, and they're all different amplitudes as well, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, say something like that. So I've replaced that with that. So that adds complexity. It still defines the space because the average of those delays are around about the same. But the simplification in terms of the model is these 7 are all coming from the one direction. I haven't, and the reason why I do that is obviously computational complexity. It gets out of hand if I have to create 7 more directions for each of those. So this is a reasonable enough approximation to fool you. So now if you consider that, and now consider the situation of, actually, I'll just go back to my thing and show you a bit of this. Now, if you look at what I've actually got here, I'll show you. That is basically my spatial panning setup. So it's quite a large space, 59 by 45 meters. You can ignore the vertical distance because it's switched off. But I've got 6 different sources. So that's a left early reflection, right early reflection, right minus left. So that's taken from a side channel. So this one I've actually, where is it? Right minus left, early. I've actually, I'm trying to remember which one I put it in. I'll have a look. No, it's not that one. If you look in here, no, where is it? Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. Oh, no, sorry. Right minus left early, yeah. I'm thinking about the late reflections. I've added some late reflections to give a bigger sense of space, which is basically the same content as those two, but I include a time delay. So I'm trying to remember where it is. Where is it? I'm sure I did. Wait on, I'm looking at the wrong one. That's why. There you go. I have a delay there. I've added an extra 70 milliseconds delay for those to give extra space. So anyway, for this particular reworking of this track in stereo, I've added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sources. So I've got 6 different sources on my spatial pan region, and they're all going to have different delays and different reflections. So if I now go back to my whiteboard, so I've got 6 different sources. There's 6 sources. Each of those sources has, in this case, because there's no ceiling reflection, 5 different panning directions. So that becomes, if I were to do that on a mixing desk, I'd need 30 channels. 30 channels because I need 30 different panners. And that excludes the fact that I also need a panner that pans in 360 degrees, which most stereo mixing desks aren't going to be able to do. So even that, from that point of view, it becomes problematic. But I got 30 of those. But not only do I have 30 of those, I've also got that times 7. So 210 if I'm right. That gives me 210 different delay lines. 210. This is just for 6 channels. So what happens if I've got, say, 20 channels? If, like the original mix is. If I was mixing 20 different instruments, So for 20 channels, excluding the ceiling, I've got 5 different panning directions. So that's 5 times 20. So that's 100 channels. So I've got 100 channels there. And then on top of that, I've got 7 different delays. So I've got 700 delays. So you really think you can do that on a mixing desk? No, you can't. That's the problem. That is the only way you could physically do that on a mixing desk, is if the mixing desk was digital and it implemented my spatial panning in it. It's just impossible to do. And it's that large number of sources that are there. So like in my 20 channel example case of 100 different panning directions and 700 different delays, it's that complexity that actually gives the entire mix its reality. Because that's much closer to reality than what you get from a conventional mix. Because in reality, you hear sound coming from all over the place. And that's exactly what I'm trying to achieve with this basic technology. But it gets ignored because obviously it's not a real mixing desk. It's not hardware. It's a DAW, and I don't know, real mixing engineers only use mixing desks. But it's bloody stupid. It's really bloody stupid. I suppose the other thing I can mention is how my actual reverb process and my synthetic space actually works. I shall point that out as well. So, because I'm completely open with this sort of shit, I'm not trying to hide behind patents or anything like that. I don't care. I really don't care. At some point in time, because I'm getting old and whatever, and like I'm 59 at the moment, probably I'm not going to live forever. So at some point in the future, not too distant future, I don't know when exactly, I'll probably make all my software open source. Simple as that. Simply because I'll be too old to maintain it, and the only way to make it survive my own lifetime is to make it open source. Basically, private companies, when they die, their intellectual property dies with them. So if you want to make something live forever, make it open source. Well, as close to forever. The way humanity is going, maybe nothing's going to live forever. But anyway, back to how I realize my reverb processing in synthetic space, which again, like, I'm no genius when it comes to environmental acoustics. The reason why I actually wrote synthetic space in the first place was I had the good fortune of stumbling across an article by an American environmental acoustician, acoustics engineer or whatever, who was talking about church acoustics. It was like a 3 or 4 part online blog, and it made it perfectly clear to me how all this acoustics dark art stuff works. And basically from that, then it immediately struck me, oh yeah, I think I know how to actually write a reverb now. I know how I can implement one. I had one false start, but the second idea, the follow-up idea of how to actually realize one, works perfectly, and it's basically what I've used ever since. It's no different. So what's it based on? It's just based on, first off, you just got your simple classical feedback reverb process. something like that. So you've got a time delay here, tour, you've got an input coming in here, you've got a feedback path. So what you end up with a classical delay line with feedback is you end up with, say, your primary response, then you get a delay, then you get another delay. Oh, sorry, I needed to put a small gain in here. I don't know, put delta or something, which makes it decay away. So that's a very primitive sort of attempt to make diffusion. Make a reverb tail. So the problem with that is it's a classical echo. So you'll hear it as an echo. It just sounds like an echo. So how do you make something like this sound like it isn't an echo? Well, the way I do it is you take these and you take your time delays and you choose a whole bunch of time delays, different time delays that are basically based off prime numbers. So none of the time delays are divisible by any other time delays. And you adjust the decay rates for the different time delays such that they all decay at the same rate. And you also give a slight variation on like the amplitude of them. So then instead of that, you might have another delay that looks like this. Oh, and that's also, you have a variable start delay as well. So you might have something that looks like this, for instance. So it's slightly different delay time, and then you have another one with a slightly different delay time. So maybe it does this. So you just keep on adding different ones with different times that aren't related. They're not integer multiples of one another. They're all prime number relations. So pretty much you start ending up with something looks reasonably random, but it's still discrete. So that's the fundamental. I can't remember how many of these I use. I think it's probably something like 11 or 15 or something like that. So that's the basic construct, the initial construct to get a reverberant tail. So you basically have like 15 of those or something in parallel with different time delays. So how do I get further complexity out of that? Well, that's easy. So basically, like I've got a say my current reverb tail is full of discrete things that look something like this, maybe. Right? So all I do is I stick on the front of it a finite impulse response filter, an FIR, which is basically, in a classical sense, it's just, what is it? Whoops, did that round back to front. So you've got these different weights for each of them. And they all feed into a summing junction. So that's your input, that's your output. So that's a classical finite impulse response setup. basically where tau in this case is just the sampling period of your sample stream. So like, for instance, if it's 44.1 kilohertz or whatever, and you have these different weights. Basically, I just choose, I use a Fourier transform to come up with a flat magnitude frequency response, randomize the phase, inverse Fourier transform, and window to come up with the weights for my FIR. So basically what I end up with, if I were to plot the impulse response of that, would look something like this, basically. A whole bunch of random, it's much denser than that, really, basically. It'd just look like random noise, basically. So if you take this random noise here and then you feed it into here, what you get is in terms of the combined impulse response, you get a convolution of the both, of that with that, convolution. So it's basically sweeping that impulse response over this impulse response, multiplying the two together and summing them to get an individual value. So it ends up smearing this, so that becomes something that looks like this. Really poor, but basically it'll end up looking very random. It'll end up looking very random. And that's the secret behind Hubble synthetic space, the reverberation tail, how it actually works. It's very simple. It's very simple, it's very cost efficient, because the length of this finite impulse response filter only has to be long enough to span the minimum distance between, the maximum distance between individual reflections in my simplified reverberant tail. And that's the basis of it. That's essentially it. That's all there is to it. All these prime number delays and things like that, I basically have a table that is predetermined. So one large set of different numbers and whatever. Similarly for the finite impulse response stuff, I've got those frequency responses predetermined because I didn't choose any. I chose ones that, because each one of these, they don't have a perfectly uniform frequency response. So I actually chose from a large set the ones that looked most uniform to me, that were generated randomly. So basically every channel in synthetic space, irrespective of what the channel format is going to have a unique one of these and a unique set of these. And that's what gives it complexity. That's what makes it convincing. Although some people may dispute that, I don't know. I think I've had some people try it and say, oh, they didn't like it. It just doesn't sound real. But and the other thing, the part that I added to actually, because one thing in the original synthetic space, everything's diffuse. It didn't actually provide good early reflection content. So it didn't really invoke a clear idea of space. So I actually fixed that by adding what I call discrete early reflections. And how do you think I got discrete early reflections? I actually used my spatial panner internally in synthetic space. So when you actually switch on discrete early reflections, basically every source channel in the format is represented with a spatial panner with a fixed geometry based on the size setting. So that's essentially how it works. So that's exactly why when I actually do a mix and I use spatial panning, I switch off discrete early reflections in synthetic space, because I don't need it. It's in the content that's being sent in. That's pretty much it. I can add one other thing. I recently had some feedback from somebody who I gave access to my synthetic space. It's somebody who has worked with various plugin developers and things like that. So I gave him free access to test it. And he actually sent me an email back. I'm not actually going to name who he is, but I shall read to you his comments that he made. And this is word for word what he said. If he sees the video and wants to own up to his own comments, fair game, but I'll leave it up to him. He basically says, synthetic space is unreal. Parvo. I've been playing quite a bit with synthetic space, vocals, flutes, drums, piano, and it sounds really, really, really great. Been comparing it against Soft Tube Czar, Liquid Sonic's Seventh Heaven, and Thu Relab LX Complete. To me, the synthetic space is the best of the bunch. So much that I even think I should be using this as a mastering reverb with pass-through on in that case. It sounds way more organic than the rest, and it has perfectly controlled response in the dynamics. It sounds really high-end. I'm actually impressed. The feeling is that the dry source has been actually recorded with real ambient mics, no matter the size of the synthetic room. And whilst I could get the Czar to sound close, past the 2-second mark on the reverb length and it starts to crumble in longer tails. Synthetic space holds it together until the end. I want to take some more time playing around with recreating different kinds of drum rooms with it, but so far it is just insane. Does that come as a surprise to me? No, not really. Given the theory that I just covered, it makes perfect sense that it should sound like a real, well, as close to a real idealized space as possible. And it doesn't have a limitation on the timeline, because as you see, it's just constructed of simple feedback delays plus a finite impulse response feeding them. A finite impulse response filter feeding them with a noise-like impulse response. So it makes perfect sense to me that that is the way it sounds, and the fact that it sounds very diffuse and hard, and not only because of the diffusion. The other how should I put it? Like, one problem with adding reverb that isn't very good. So like if you add reverb synthetic reverb that isn't very good. So you'll have your primary signal there, you'll have say 1, 2, 3 or so reflections. These reflections in terms of their amplitude are quite large compared to that, because there's few of them. So like your reverb level, the overall level, how strong your reverberation is dependent on how many of these there are. Because synthetic space, because of the way it works, and because it's using that noise FIR convolved with these discrete things, basically ends up with a reverb level of these individual reflections. If you actually recorded like the reverb and showed it in a DAW, you would see, instead of seeing these big discrete discrete reflections. Instead of seeing that, what you'd see is a peak, and then you'd see this tiny noise-like thing at the bottom, which is completely uniform and sort of exponentially decaying. Whereas a much simpler reverb has like these large discrete things. So the consequence of that is these large discrete things potentially interfere with your intelligibility with this. Because these individual responses are so much smaller, they're tiny, and there's millions of them. Well, not millions, thousands. It means it's very hard for this to interfere with intelligibility of your primary source. It's almost impossible. You have to push the reverb level so high that it just sounds terrible anyway. So with realistic reverb levels, it just sounds great. And that's the whole point of having diffuse reflection. If you have diffuse reflection, the individual amplitudes of each reflection is so much smaller than it would be for a specular reflection case. And that's why specular reflection is bad in a reverb tail. It's really bad because it takes away from intelligibility. And I think I've said enough, but what can I add in conclusion? What should I add in conclusion? Yeah, again, like I said, I'm just completely peeved that the professional music recording institutions just, I don't know whether they dismiss out of hand what I do or whether they just don't recognize it or they're completely unaware of what is possible. Perhaps it's the latter. So, yeah, in terms of the Metallica juggernaut, my opinion is that, yeah, all respect to the band, everything else, I think your soundtrack on your live videos doesn't do justice to your concerts. It's crap. It could be a hell of a lot better. Personally, I'd be happy to do a mix of one of their concerts for free, just to demonstrate the point to them of how much better it could actually sound. But you can actually get a fair idea from what I actually did in my DAW. And maybe I should conclude just by playing the track end to end so you can actually appreciate it. So I think I shall switch over and do that now, but I'm not going to bother trying to explain what I did any further, because I think the key points to take into consideration is not what I've done, but that if they did things better, using better approaches, you would get much better result. So here it is, Unforgiven end to end for you. Or not quite end to end because I cut the opening.
Forgive yourselves, Perth. Do it. Do it now. Thank you.